Let the BCS battle rage on. Mark Rogers TV here to continue our series comparing the conferences. In our first video post, we checked out the mighty SEC. Now we look at the embattled Big Ten. We consider it the worst non-conference showing in league history in 2012. The Big Ten mustered only one win over a top 25 opponent. That was Michigan State at home against Boise State. Let's check out bowl play. We know that the Big Ten went 2-5, but how did they compete on the field against, in many cases, top teams from other leagues, in particular the SEC? But first we check out the granddaddy of them all, the Rose Bowl. So we've got Wisconsin losing to Stanford at the Rose Bowl 20-14. Okay, let's check out the matchups here, though. Wisconsin was the 6th seed in the Big Ten. How did they make the championship game? Well, of course, we had Ohio State and Penn State ineligible. So we've got to take that into consideration. That is a huge factor in checking out these bowl games because we take the number 1 seed, Ohio State, 8-0 in the conference, 12-0 overall. Take them out of the mix. Along with Penn State, who would have tied Michigan for the 3rd seed at 6-2 in the conference. So you take 2 of your 3 best teams out of play. That just moves everybody else at least up a notch, most likely 2 notches, and then you create mismatches on the field. It showed in some spots, but in most spots, the Big Ten competed against better teams from other conferences, and that starts at the Rose Bowl. Again, Wisconsin loses to Stanford 20-14, so you've got the Pac-12 number 1 seed taking on the 6th seed from the Big Ten, and Wisconsin acquitted themselves rather well, taking this game down to the final drive, losing 20-14 against the Stanford team that, again, was one of the 6, 7, 8 best teams in the country in Wisconsin, losing that game 20-14. In non-conference play, Wisconsin squeaked by a very game Utah State team at home that finished 11-2, and they lost to Oregon State on the West Coast, a game that they lost 12-7. Wisconsin, again, finishes at 4-4 in the Big Ten, so they couldn't even beat the top teams in the Big Ten. They didn't defeat a team over 500 in the Big Ten until the Big Ten championship game when they completely annihilated Nebraska. So Wisconsin acquitted themselves well at the Rose Bowl against Stanford 20-14. Okay, next up we've got Nebraska and Georgia. Bulldogs win at 45-31. Nebraska held a lead into the 4th quarter. The Bulldogs' superior talent and speed took over in the final 10 minutes, and they win at 45-31. We give this a dominance factor of 5. We explained in our SEC video that we're giving dominance factors, meaning how dominant was the win or the loss, depending on the perspective. In rating the Big Ten, we rate this a Georgia win of 5 dominance factor on a scale of 1 to 10 against Nebraska. We gave Stanford a 2.5 against Wisconsin as that game went down to the final series. Again, Nebraska played really well. They had a lead in the 4th quarter. Georgia took it over. So we're talking about a Georgia team that was one of the top 3 or 4 teams in all the land. They took Alabama, of course, down to the final play, the final 5 seconds of the SEC championship game for a bid in the BCS national championship game. So then the next game, Nebraska, getting annihilated by Wisconsin by 39, had to face up against Georgia. They played very well. Bottom line was it was a loss. That Georgia team, again, barely lost to Alabama. They lost to South Carolina as well. They were the number 2 seed in the SEC, winning the Eastern Division. They defeated Georgia Tech as well out of conference play in their big non-conference showing. Nebraska loses this one 45-31. All right, we've got Michigan and South Carolina, the best of the bowl games for the Big Ten. Despite the loss by Michigan, this was the most impressive showing as Michigan, a team that was 8-4, matched up again against a team that's probably the 6th, 7th, 8th best team in the country in South Carolina. Michigan took them down to the last 7 seconds. If they could have wrapped up 1 sack on that final drive, Michigan would have won the game. They couldn't make the play. South Carolina won 33-28. But we credit Michigan here. Look at the losses. They lost to Ohio State down to the last series of that game, 26-21. If Denard Robinson doesn't throw 5 gifts at Notre Dame, Michigan wins that game on the road. There's a lot of ifs there, but I think you need to take into consideration the way Michigan played against 3 of the best teams in the country in Alabama. Got blown out in that one, but played Notre Dame and Ohio State very close. The Nebraska game, if Denard Robinson doesn't get hurt, or Devin Gardner gets the call instead of the third stringer against Nebraska, Michigan possibly wins that game on the road. So again, Michigan plays well against South Carolina. We give that a dominance factor of a half for South Carolina over Michigan in that one. And Michigan's other out-of-conference losses, nothing to be ashamed of. All right, Northwestern finally gets a win for the Big Ten in bowl play against Mississippi State, 34-20. Mississippi State, SEC team, so there's a respect factor there. They came in at 8-4, but Mississippi State plays a garbage non-conference schedule. They lost to everybody good on their schedule, so they lost to a lot of really good football teams in Alabama, Texas A&M, LSU, on down the line, but they defeated no one. Northwestern took a 2-touchdown lead early in the game against Mississippi State, and they held on to it. So they get a dominance factor of 6 over Mississippi State on a scale of 1 to 10 in that football game at the Gator Bowl and winning by 14. Northwestern had 2 really good non-conference wins in defeating Syracuse and also in defeating Vanderbilt. So we mentioned Michigan State with a lone top 25 win for the Big Ten in defeating Boise State. But Northwestern also, in effect, had a top 25 win because Vanderbilt, though not ranked at the time of the win, certainly marched on to a great showing at 9-4 in the SEC and finished in the top 25. And Northwestern gave Vandy one of its 4 losses. Okay, we've got Michigan State pulling out a win over TCU in the Buffalo Wild Wings Bowl, 17-16. An ugly, ugly football game. TCU came in at 7-5, Michigan State at 6-6, and certainly the hard luck team in the Big Ten. Best defense in the Big Ten. Took a ton of games down to the wire, kept losing down in the final seconds to most of these ball clubs, including, of course, Ohio State, Michigan, and Nebraska as well. So Michigan State, of course, goes 6-6. They win the bowl game 17-16. We give them a dominance factor of it was that close, a half, because they needed a turnover on a muffed punt, and they needed some big defensive plays and a completed pass by Le'Veon Bell of 29 yards to get a scoring drive going because Michigan State had no offense going in that game and defeating TCU. So they did it with smoke and mirrors and defense. So again, dominance factor of a half point. TCU defeated Texas, Baylor, and West Virginia to their credit. They lost to Oklahoma and Kansas State. They pretty much beat who you would expect. Along with, though, Texas and Baylor, those are impressive wins because Baylor looked very good in its bowl game, as did Texas in defeating Oregon State. So nice win for Michigan State against TCU there at 17-16. They also, as we noted, Michigan State defeated Boise State as well, a top 25 team with just 2 losses. A game the Big Ten should have wrapped up. Minnesota loses to Texas Tech in its bowl game 34-31. Texas Tech came in at 7-5 in the Big 12. They defeated West Virginia and TCU. They lost the 5 games in the Big 12. You would expect them to lose. Minnesota was not a good football team. Yeah, they went 4-0 out of conference against nobody, 2-6 in the Big Ten. So for them to have a 10-point lead in the fourth quarter, lose by 3 only because they made some questionable coaching decisions late in that game and lose 34-31, actually to Minnesota's credit and the Big Ten's credit, that a team that everybody decent in the Big Ten pounded. Again, Minnesota at 2-6 in the Big Ten loses the bowl game 34-31 to Texas Tech. Okay, dominance factor there, 1, because that was a razor-close game that Minnesota won or had won before they made some costly errors late. Okay, the real embarrassing showing for the Big Ten in bowl play. Purdue loses to Oklahoma State 58-14. Okay, we saw it coming. Oklahoma State was the biggest point spread favorite in bowl play, 17.5, and they made it stand up. Oklahoma State was not a great football team, 7-5 coming in. They had a win against West Virginia, Texas Tech, and TCU. They went 5-4 in the Big 12. They lost to Arizona by 21. So Purdue, despite a good showing early in the season against Notre Dame, giving them some hope, not Danny hope, but giving them some hope, just losing to Notre Dame, a game in which they had won before Notre Dame kicked a field goal on the last play of the game at South Bend. Purdue looked like they were going to be a factor and were the chic underdog pick in the Big Ten, but they collapsed and certainly collapsed in the bowl game. But of course, lost their coach. That certainly didn't help. So again, Purdue loses 58-14. That's a dominance factor of 9.5. Might as well make it 10 in that game. Purdue losing 58-14 to Oklahoma State. Okay, dominance factor for the Big Ten in bowl play, a negative 11.5. That compares to a plus 21.5 for the SEC. So that not a good indication of the out-of-conference performance of the Big Ten. Okay, overall, counting the bowls and counting non-conference regular season play, the Big Ten went 2-3 against the SEC, 1-4 against the Pac-12. Of note, though, is that all 4 losses came on the West Coast. Nebraska had to go to UCLA, Wisconsin to Oregon State, etc. And, of course, Wisconsin in the Rose Bowl losing to Stanford. So 1-4, all those losses on the road for the Big Ten. They went 1-1 against the ACC, 0-2 against the Big 12. Both of those bowl games we just noted, Minnesota and Purdue losing. And against the Big East, though, the Big Ten went 2-0. They went 0-3 in those 3 annual battles against Notre Dame. And we've got to throw in the Boise State game, since Boise State, not a BCS team and not Notre Dame, but certainly a top 25 team. And Michigan State won that game. So the Big Ten finishes at 8-13 against the rest of the BCS conferences, plus Notre Dame and Boise State. Again, we have to factor in the disclaimer. Ohio State not present in bowl play, and not Penn State, the 1 and 3 seeds. That moves everybody else up to play tougher competition out of conference. No excuses for the Big Ten, though. Again, 8-13 against the BCS non-conferences, plus Boise State, Notre Dame. Not a good showing for the Big Ten. College football fans, let us know what you have to think about our analysis on the Big Ten non-conference schedule in 2012 and bowl play in 2013. Right here on Mark Rogers TV.